defines a generation. Music is a soundtrack of revolution. Music is a soundtrack of movement. Music is a soundtrack of cause. There is an intersection of politics and pop culture that you didn't even know existed. There's some boy, some girl sitting in a cubicle along K Street, somewhere in DC. A boy, a girl sitting in a cubicle along a hill with a Capitol with a dome who has single-handedly decided what you wore today. Whoa.
Mike Muse is an industrial engineer, a music executive, a political architect. He breaks down the intersection of politics and pop culture. This is the Mike Muse Show.
What is happening, America? It's me, Mike Muse, and I am so excited to be joining you guys today on this journey. I think for those of you who are familiar with me, you will always hear me say how excited I am. Yeah, I'm a little cheesy when it comes to that, but I just love the conversation of politics and pop culture. I think there is no better intersection than those two. My work has been about that. I have this statement, if you will, where I say I delve into the issues of how policy affects pop culture through the lens of sports, music, film, fashion, and technology. And the whole point is to get Americans to really see our democracy from a different lens and to really talk about the unexpected and to really see how when you pull these layers back into all the areas of lifestyle that we love and that we participate in on a day-to-day basis, once you see that, you would kind of reclaim your democracy for you and no longer allow a certain sector of the population to control what it is you eat, the car that you ride, the denim jacket that you rock, the Nike sneaks that you rock on your feet, the music that you listen to, those Beats by Dre headphones that you have on your head. Those are all have a policy implication to it. And so why shouldn't you be involved in that conversation? Why shouldn't you be involved in that dialogue? And so that's really what the purpose of the Mike Muse Show is here on Serious Insight. And I really just want to peel layers back, but I want you to come along on this journey with me and to really be connected. And let's learn the unexpected together. Let's go down this journey together. It is going to be fun. I am learning something new every day about politics, and that's what makes it so cool and fascinating. And sometimes we get distracted by all the noise that's happening with taxes and nuclear energy and denuclearization and all the conspiracy theories that are out there. And it kind of just distracts us from that. And a lot of us aren't really paying attention to that. A lot of us that doesn't affect our day to day. But my goal is if you can really peel back those layers and hey, if you like wine, if you love drinking rosé, if you love going to brunch, you know there's a wine caucus for that in DC. Do you know that we can actually lobby the wine caucus if we want our rosé to be cheaper? Imagine that, right? And so those are the cool things that we're going to go down this road and explore in a very fun, practical, nuts and bolts kind of way. Always feel free to tweet me. I want this to be a two-way conversation. I want you guys to be engaged in the whole process. You can tweet me at I am Mike Muse. That's MUS as in Sam E, and engage with me. You can agree with me, you can disagree with me, you can agree with our guests. You know, I would love to be in a conversation with you as the show progresses for this episode today and as the show continues on this path on the Insight. I am so excited. I'm so glad to be on this journey with you, and let's have some fun. Speaking of fun, you can't have fun without having music. Music really is a soundtrack of our lifestyle, right? It's what we wake up to, it's what we get dressed to, it's what we get in our cars on our way to work, it's what we drive to, it's what we party to. It's summertime, so all those good barbecues, you need a good music soundtrack. And of course, you're listening to your music differently now. We no longer have remember those bulky Walkmans that we used to have, or maybe those bulky Discmans that we have. And no, now it's all digital streaming. It's interactive, right? It's your Apple Music, right? It's your Pandora. It's your Sirius XM radio. And so the way that we have listened to music has changed. And as a result, there's some policy happening around that discourse in DC that is really governing the way that we're beginning to listen to our music and how it's being streamed for us. But more so, how about this? Are there any artists out there? Are there any singers? Is there any songwriters out there listening right now? Is there any producers listening there right now? This is why you should be paying attention. As a small business owner, as an entrepreneur in those space, in those fields, there's lots of legislation that is happening that can really affect the things of your daily lifestyle, how you get paid, how you're able to support your family, how you're able to support your livelihood, whether you're in Detroit, New York, Los Angeles, or of course, Nashville, right? Home of fantastic songwriters. There's some policy that is affecting you right now underneath the umbrella of the Music Modernization Act. You might have recalled Smokey Robinson actually came to Capitol Hill about a couple of weeks ago and really talked about the need for these type of digital streaming services to pay writers and producers and even sound engineers, but also too bringing legacy acts into play. And legacy acts, for this intents and purpose of our conversation, will be described by any music publication that was produced prior to 1972. And so, listen, let's just get into it. Let's have some fun. Let's really talk about the history of this, how this all came to be, and really how we can make our politicians kind of work for us on the music things and things that we love for our barbecues. And so I have a couple of really fantastic guests that's going to join me today. I have Professor Lateef Mtima, who is from Howard Law School and head the Intellectual Property Justice Center. I have Ian Holder who's going to join us from Sony ATV, which is the world's largest music publisher. It's happening right now. And of course, I have the incredible, talented Claude Kelly, singer-songwriter, from everyone from Kelly Clarkson to Bruno Mars to Michael Jackson. So it's going to be a heck of a conversation. But first of all, let's just start with the foundation of it. Let's just start with the basics of it. And for that, I have my great friend on the line with me, Lateef Mtima. Lateef, welcome to the Mike Muse Show on Insight.
Hi, Mike. Thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, no, I thank you for being here, Lateef. You have this incredible background as being a Harvard Law School graduate, now a professor of law at Howard University, and now you have founded and you're the director of the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice, and you have such a great history when it comes to intellectual property, intellectual rights, and music and publishing and all the creative sides. And I remember going and hearing you talk recently, and you really gave this really fantastic story on the history of songwriting and the history of royalties and how individuals are paid. And so I couldn't think of a better person that kind of crosses history, politics, policy, and legal. So you're the man, Lateef.
Well, thanks. You are, as always, too kind.
So, Lateef, Matt, let's just get right into it, Matt. And the whole Music Modernization Act, right? Like, the whole point of it is just allow singers and, songwriters and producers and sound engineers to be able to be paid fairly on these digital distribution services. Talk to us why that was important for Congress to take that up.
Yeah, well, this legislation, it addresses some problems that have been around in the music industry and the way in which copyright protects and provides compensation to everyone who's involved in the production of musical works. And these problems and difficulties have been around since we're going way back to like the early 1900s. And in order to understand the importance of this legislation, you really have to get into a little bit, as you said, as you were, explaining what we're about to talk about today. You really have to get into a little bit of the history to understand how did we get to where we are, and why is it so critical that we need this new perspective and this new legislation to address some of these longstanding problems. So the best way to understand this is that right from the beginning, we have to understand that when we as consumers, when we listen to music, we approach it as if it's just one work of art, right? You listen to a song on the radio or in your MP3 player, it's one work of art. But what we have to understand is that from the perspective of the copyright law, it's two separate works, right? One work is the musical composition itself, the words and the music, right? And copyright protects that in a certain way. Separate from that is the actual recording, right? The actual recording performance. And we call that a sound recording. So I'm just going to spend just a couple of minutes first just talking only about the musical composition. And that's only going to involve, obviously, the writer-composer of the work. And then we'll circle back and we'll talk about the sound recording, because when you talk about the sound recording, that's where you start to talk about the interest of the performing artist, right? But first, let's just deal only with the musical work.
Okay.
Musical work has been protected by the copyright law ever since 1831, long time. Where the difficulties come in is around the turn of the century, the early 1900s, you have the first music recording technology. It was actually something called the piano player, right?
Yeah.
The mechanical piano player, right? And all of this is, you see that in westerns, Western movies, is that piano that plays even though no one is actually hitting the keys, right? Okay. Once that technology was introduced, you could actually put a song on a recording on a little tube. You stick it in the piano, and then you hear that music being played. No voices, right? You just hear the melody being played. When they began to do that, songwriters brought suit, basically to say, hey, listen, what you're doing is you're making a copy of our musical composition without our permission, You need to ask us to do that, and you need to pay us for that. Supreme Court says, no, that's not really a copy of your song. It's just a mechanical part of a machine, right? So they're kind of looking at it from a wrong perspective. Congress gets in, responds by saying, no, okay, we're going to clarify this. It is a copy. You do need to go to songwriters and ask them for their permission and to pay them. But here's the wrinkle. At that particular point in time, right, the largest producer of these mechanical pianos had already signed deals with virtually all of the songwriters to say, hey, you're going to let me put your songs on these mechanical rolls. So what Congress realized at that time, this is way back in 1909, was that, you know what, the minute we say that a mechanical roll is a copy, right, this means that there's only going to be one company that's going to be allowed to put these songs onto rolls, because that company has already locked in all of the songwriters into contracts. So Congress came up with a solution. Congress says, yes, it is a copy, but we are going to introduce something that we call the mechanical license, right? And that's why it's called that, because it came about in that particular context. And basically what it says is that, hey, you're a composer, you're a songwriter, you come up with a song, you get to negotiate the first deal, meaning that first conversation that you have with somebody who wants to put your song on a mechanical roll, you get to negotiate the best possible deal you can. But after you have made one deal, thereafter, any other producer that comes up to you and says, hey, listen, I want to record your song, meaning I want to put your song on a mechanical roll, you have to say yes. That's why it's called a compulsory license. And not only do you have to say yes, you don't even get to negotiate the rate. The rate is determined by this license that is passed by Congress.
So Lateef, if I can
just a few pennies.
If I can interrupt you just really quickly, though, I'm hearing you talk about that, and you're talking about the early 1900s, right? You wouldn't even think. I'm thinking back at the time I was with my dad. My dad was a big fan of Western and cowboys and those type of shows, and so I'm sitting up here smiling, just reflecting on watching those Westerns with my father and seeing like those mechanical rolls actually going by in the juke joints, right, and in the saloons, right, you know, if you will. Why did Congress feel the need at that point to be able to have to legislate music? Because we don't really think about Congress today, and this is really the great point where we are with the Mike Muse show, is to really peel back the unexpected. We always think about Congress and politics, monitoring our financial services system, monitoring, our environmental systems, and monitoring our food systems. But you don't really think about Congress, moderating our music. So why did Congress feel the need to intervene at that moment?
Well, because you got to remember that Congress had already extended copyright protection to musical compositions back in 1831. Right? And the reason why Congress did that is to say, all right, we want to treat musical composers the same way that we treat the authors of a book, right? We want to provide you with some sort of incentive and some sort of protection such that when you create your work, we're going to give you the incentive to get your work out there. In other words, we want you to put your book on paper and publish many copies of it and send it out to as many people who can possibly read it. Similarly with your music, right? We want you to get your music out there to everyone. Put it down on paper so other people can read it and then learn to play it on a piano. The thing of it is that once you do that, obviously you lose a certain amount of control over your work. And so that might be a disincentive for you to disseminating your work. So basically, by extending copyright to your work, be it a book or be it to music, what Congress is doing is giving you the encouragement. Congress is saying, hey, don't worry about it. You can send your stuff out all over the country. Let everybody hear it. Let everybody read it, because that's going to be better for our society. And if you do that, we're going to give you a legal protection such that if somebody in turn makes a copy of your book or makes a copy of your song without your permission, meaning without paying you, you're going to be able to take them into court.
So what I'm hearing is that in the early 1900s, there was a rate that was established for what we use copyright in terms of rates and fees currently in 2018. Is that my understanding of this?
Well, the rate has increased over the years, but basically it has stayed very low. I mean, it's still somewhere in the neighborhood of just a few pennies, 9, 10 cents, something of that nature. Because again, the perspective at that time was, well, we want to make certain that other producers can put the songs on their own piano rolls. It was really to protect competition within the mechanical piano roll industry, right? And really had nothing to do with music from the creative standpoint. And unfortunately, we have never really gone back and taken another look at that situation until now with this proposed Music Modernization Act legislation that is currently being discussed up on the Hill.
You know what's interesting about that, Lateef, is that what we see the problems in the early 1900s, and I'm sure even previous in 1900s, is exactly what we see in 2018 when you see these special interest groups, if you will, who are advocating the loudest, who usually get the legislation that favors them. Because even you talking now, you're saying that copyright law in terms of that pay rate that was established was really for the manufacturers of the piano rolls and not necessarily for the artist. And so the artist kind of got left out of that scenario based upon what we would say now, I'm sure, is the lobbying effect, if you will. And we see that happening so often in other legislation that we have currently, not even just the music. It all comes down to who is lobbying the most, which is why I thought, Lateef, it was important to have you here to really give us that historical context and to really for our listeners out there listening to us to be able to understand the importance of, one, being engaged in democracy, two, paying attention, and three, making sure you have things that you're interested in from your lifestyle perspective advocated for. Because now, Lateef, it seems like there's a course correction going on with the Music Modernization Act now, where it seems to, in a bipartisan way, lends itself more so for the artistic community.
Absolutely. Because when you think about it, you're absolutely right. You know, in setting this mandatory rate and setting this mandatory rate as being a very small rate, right, that's obviously going to benefit the mechanical piano roll industry, which means you have more participants in that industry. Because if I come along and I want to, start producing these rolls, I know I can do it, and the only thing I have to do is to pay at that time 2 cents to the composer of the song, right? But when you think about it from the composer's standpoint, well, I don't want only the power to negotiate the best deal the first time around. I want to be able to negotiate whatever is the best deal I can get with every producer going forward, right? Yeah. But since I didn't have the same type of power that the mechanical piano industry had, I basically have lost the ability to decide who gets to record my composition and at what price.
Wow, that literally is what is happening right now in modern day politics, Lateef. I'm so glad you're going to be joining us, man. Lateef, do not go anywhere, because I think now is a perfect time to bring our next guest in by the name of Ian Holder from Sony ATV, and he can really give us his perspective from a publisher perspective, from currently the landscape of the music industry. And Lateef, you mentioned producers. This guy, Ian Holder, Lateef, has worked with some of the most well-known, well-respected musicians and producers and writers that we actually will be listening to this weekend at the barbecue. So, citizens, please stay with us. As always, tweet us at I am Mike Muse, as I am Mike Muse, M-U-S and Sam E, and also here at Insight at SXM Insight. And we'll be right back continuing this conversation further. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a very special guest here with me to kind of help take us down this journey of music and just all the things that we love and all the things that we jam to. And really, it's been fascinating just to really hear that all those Westerns that I was watching with my dad, Congress had something to do as I watched those mechanical rolls go by on the piano. And then to really recognize that wasn't even for, when Congress set that rate, that wasn't even to protect the artist. That was really to protect the manufacturers of it. And citizens, how often do we see that come to light even in current day conversations, man? But I have a guest with me who is just a fantastic dynamic force in the music industry. It goes by the name of Ian Holder, and ladies and gentlemen, he's one of the fancy ones in the music industry. Ian Lilly, just fresh off the plane, coming from Cannes. Is that how you say it, Ian? Is it Cannes or Cannes?
I think it's Cannes.
Cannes, somewhere in the south of France, doing something really fancy and bougie. But he was speaking on music industry and creativity and publishing and copyright. So, Ian, thank you for jumping off the plane and coming straight in here to this series, have this conversation with our audience. Ian is the Vice President Creative at Sony ATV Music Publishing, and I know Ian might be a little too bashful to say it, so I'll say it for him. Sony ATV is the world's #1 publisher right now. You guys got what ranked #1 songs in the Billboard for a year straight? Is that what happened?
Yeah, something like that. We're trying to stay busy.
Yeah,
Just trying to stay busy and doing that thing.
Listen, when you're on radio, Ian, there's no time to be humble. So, like, we don't have a lot of time to dig into it. Ladies and gentlemen, Ian is overseeing some of the fantastic careers right now in publishing, from A$AP Rocky to A$AP Ferg, Kid Ink, Pusha T, Elijah Blake. He's also worked with some fantastic individuals, from Post Malone, Designer Ray Shrummer, the Justice League, Rick Ross, Drake. I think we've all heard of that guy. This guy's bio just can go on and on and on, but for time's sake, I won't belabor the point right now. But Ian, let's just get into it, man. First, welcome to the Mike Muse Show, man.
Thank you for having me, Mike. I'm glad to be here.
It's been an honor to watch your career rise, man. It's been an honor to watch you sit at the top of the music industry and the publishing, and to really be able to navigate this space is a very critical time for music, for artists, and for writers, and for producers, and for sound engineers.
Definitely is. I mean, we're in a fight. I think we've been for the past, I think it's always been in a fight, but for the past 5 to 7 years, it's been more of an emphasis on trying to get this legislation passed and updated and modernized as we see with the Music Modernization Act. And it's all about making sure our songwriters are properly paid and everything is in full right for them.
Yeah. From a nuts and bolts perspective, Ian, when you think about Sony ATV, you think about publishing houses, like, what exactly is that? Like, what do you guys do at Sony ATV when we hear this word publishers? Because, yes, there's a lot of aspiring writers and producers and out there that's listening to us, but there may be just some from the audience who just love the music but may not really understand what Sony ATV or publishers like Sony, what is it that you guys do, and why is this legislation important to you?
Well, you got to think beyond the artists that most of the general public know. We deal with hundreds, if not, in some cases, when you deal with performance rights organizations, thousands of writers, and most of the times these writers don't get the recognition that an artist might get because they're in full frontal. So there are writers that we help development from early on. Sometimes it's helping to increase their network amongst the creative community. So in my case, it's dealing with co-writing sessions, making sure they're meeting new and other artists that are being new and established. And a lot of times it's we're a point of contact for their catalog. Mm-hmm. So, it's just building them up and being the first line of defense for licensing and creative deals when it comes down to co-writes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think you've said something really interesting. I want to harp on when you talk about those who are behind the scenes that you don't really hear about, right? Because audience, think of who your favorite singer is right now. More than likely, that singer didn't write the song, right? They're actually singing the words that a writer actually wrote for them to sing. And Ian, as we look at the changing landscape of the economics of the business industry, all the way from when we had traditional sales such as albums and CDs, that's when the writers really made the most part of their money. And then we kind of go into the next iteration of iTunes, and we see a little bit of the change in how they were actually get paid and compensated. But then once we go into this whole digital aspect of it with this interactive sites like Apple Music and Pandora and Series, then we see there's different ways of where they were lacking, right? And I think people lose sight of the fact that these are small business owners, like these are middle class individuals, right? Who need to feed their family, right? And support economics of our cities. And so talk to us a little bit about what some of the writers and producers that you were working with, what they were feeling as the music industry was evolving and changing its business models as we began to purchase or not purchase music anymore.
I think the biggest thing you'd hear from songwriters, especially as DSPs, digital streaming platforms started to, emerge on the scene, is getting 0.000 cents on the performance.
And that's like your Apple Music streaming your titles,
and
right?
YouTube,
Yeah, and YouTube.
And so on and so forth. And while they are happy to see, this emergence of the industry moving to, evolving, it's also a matter of feeling, not compensated. And especially when you go into the fact that musical works past 1972 are not being compensated at all, it's a problem. So I think one of the things Sony ATV has done, especially with our CEO and chairman, Marty Bandier, he's been a leader in the forefront of making sure not only these rights are properly adequate for all parties, but also making sure they're adequately credited on these DSPs, which is, it's hard to believe is a fight in and of itself. But you're starting to see them follow suit with, for example, Spotify. Now we see credits on Spotify. I think there's more we need to do, but it's been a point in emphasis for at least for us, for all publishers to be noted. But I'm proud by saying that I have a CEO and chairman that's really kind of the leader in the forefront of trying to make this evolution happen.
Before Congress stepped in, was it difficult to get these digital platforms in order to recognize the importance of paying these writers and these producers and these sound engineers, and to really get them to understand that there's a livelihood at stake, and you get them to understand that the business model of music was changing and that they should be fairly compensated for their work?
I think it was a big challenge. I mean, you're looking at non-musical, not only entities but people who are primarily coming from a tech background that are starting these new platforms. Imagine trying to give somebody the idea of the importance behind copyright and songwriters when in their mind they're thinking they're evolving our industry. So in one sense you can't wash one hand without the other, but I think we're starting to make strides in what this is. Obviously you can't expect new businesses, because at that time you think 10, 12 years ago, these are new businesses too. So you want to make this comfortable for people to feel okay to come into a new space and create these ideas that are, yes, changing our business, but at the same point in time there has to be an understanding of the network, that there's lives at stake, and we have to do, not just publishers, not just executives, but the music community in and of itself have to do a better job of making sure mass public understands, because it's also public perception too, to make sure that everyone knows how invaluable this is. Just like how you started the show by saying some of the things that we take for granted, like these barbecues or walking into a mall and hearing background music that you don't necessarily even think of. These are all things that are going to start to shape our future with these DSPs, because we've only scratched the surface of what it's doing for our industry and what it can do.
I think you're saying something really interesting. You're actually picking up something that Professor Lateef was talking about, in the sense of, when you look at the early 1900s, where these royalty rates were based on, was that it was really to protect the manufacturer of the piano roll and not the actual creator of the music. And what you just juxtaposed in was just really interesting to think about, in terms of these individuals from Silicon Valley who have no music background are really the ones who are structuring these economic pay scales that are advantage them, right, and disadvantage the artists and the ones who are creating the music. And so there is this notion of fairness, right? Is it fair for the Silicon Valley individuals to be able to make money off of the musicians who are creating the vibe, if you will, right? The vibe that makes people want to download these apps, the vibe that makes people want to put it on their iPhones or their Androids and go take a walk, right? Or to put it on, a playlist at the barbecue, right? So it goes back to what's being fair. So with that, Ian, would you guys say, just to put it in like a relatively practical terminology, would you say companies like Sony ATV and others similar are more like a union, if you will, for songwriters and producers and sound engineers?
Well, I wouldn't say a union.
Loosely, but yeah.
I wouldn't say a union. Because we all operate, and at the end of the day, we're here to make a profit.
Well, I more so say advocacy.
Oh yeah. I mean, and I still don't want to use the word union, because at the end of the day, to be fully fair, we're advocating for our songwriters' rights, which obviously affects us too. So while we make sure we do all the things on the developmental aspect to help build these writers up. We also make sure that we fight the best we can when it comes down to legislation and when it comes down to making things happen within the industry. But just the word union, I didn't want to.
Oh no! Listen, man, we're all learning here. This is all about exploration. Yeah. This is all about getting insight, no pun intended, on the Insight Channel, on what's happening in the music scale. Now, Professor Lateef, if I could bring you back into the conversation here, we're hearing Ian now talk about in the sense of the fight that they have to work on behalf of their clients, on behalf of their songwriters, right? And really to get Silicon Valley to be able to adjust their thinking because they have no ties to the music industry from a natural, innate ability. And so their interest, obviously, is their bottom line without being cognizant of the musicians that are out there. Can you talk to us a little bit why it was important then from this Music Modernization Act to kind of come in and to be that bridge between those two?
Yeah, because, you see, in order to get music out to the public on a mass scale, you really need three parties. You need the writer-composer to create the song. Then you need the performer to sing it. But then you also need some sort of, technology and distributor to actually record that performance on it and then get it out, okay? In the past, that last function has been provided solely by record labels. And in the past, that's where a lot of the problems and a lot of the historical inequities, bad deals between labels and artists and writers, et cetera, et cetera. Today, we have a new recording and distribution option, and that's digital platforms, right? And I think that actually the digital platforms, they have great incentive, I think, to straighten this situation out because, one problem has been that in terms of digital use of sound recordings, there have been some inequities and some lack of clarities, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, the way the law has been set up is that if you want to make digital use of a sound recording, if the sound recording was produced after 1972, a digital platform knows what to do, right? Because there's a specific law in place as of 1996 that says, yeah, you got to pay the owner of the sound recording, and half of that money goes to artists. But as was referenced earlier, if the sound recording was produced before 1972, well, federal law doesn't address it, which means what you have to do is you have to look to each law in each of the 50 states. And so as a result, digital platforms, there's a great deal of uncertainty as to what they have to do if they make digital use of a sound recording that was made prior to 1972. So here you see a wonderful example of the interest of digital platforms, Silicon Valley, if you would, merging with the interests of performing artists, because it makes sense for both of those sides to actually have a clear-cut mechanism that says, okay, this is what you have to do if you want to make use of those recordings, and on behalf of the artists, once you apply this digital performance right to pre-72 recordings, now it becomes absolutely concrete that the artist has got to be paid because the artist gets 50% of the royalty from those digital uses.
Well, Lateef, what I hear something really interesting about that is you're talking about the lay of the land and the policy and the usage and the copyright aspect of it. And Ian was talking about in terms of the dynamic in the business in the boardroom, in terms of the dynamic between publishers and songwriters and creators and those in Silicon Valley. There had to be a groundswell for this, right? And so as I begin to bring Claude into the conversation, Lateef, what do you think was the tipping point that got this attention to even get to Congress? Because so often one thing we really talk about is, the majority of taxes or healthcare or education and those big tenets. And so a lot of times we think that there's no way Congress would care about something such as music. How did we get this grassroots movement created that even got the attention of Congress to want to take up such legislation?
Well, I think getting Congress's attention, the first part really wasn't grassroots. It was really the fact that the owners of sound recordings, which are the labels, and then the digital platforms, they both recognized from a business standpoint that the situation was untenable, right? Not knowing what a digital platform can do with a pre-72 sound recording hurts both businesses, right? Labels don't get money. Digital platforms, in effect, use it at their own risk. So that's not good for either business. Businesses want certainty. They want to know what to do, who do I have to pay, what's the set price, and I can go from there. Where the grassroots aspect comes in is that artists, okay, who are caught in the middle here because they aren't getting any money from either side, either way, right? As artists and people who advocate on behalf of artists, like my Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice and other policy activists, they began to get into this and to say, hey, listen, this is not only important from a business perspective, but if Congress will anoint this compromise between the labels and the digital platforms, there is something in it for artists because artists would get 50% of these royalties. And that's one of the reasons as to why now, the Prospective Act, it sailed through the House of Representatives on a unanimous vote, because this is the first time that we have music legislation that all of the parties, the digital platforms, the labels, and the artists, all agree, hey, we're all going to get something from this, and this is going to straighten out a difficult historical situation.
I'm kind of smiling with that because your actual mood changed when you said that it sailed through the House of Representatives, and there's hope that you believe that there is some change that can come on behalf of these musicians and talented. And I'm looking at the song credits for our next guest, Claude Kelly, and there's a song that he wrote for Miley Cyrus' Party in the USA. So I'm assuming when all of this legislation passes, that will be one of the popular songs that maybe we'll be hearing. And so, Claude Kelly, man, I just want to welcome you to the Mike Muse Show. Ladies and gentlemen, Claude Kelly is an accomplished, and I do mean accomplished, singer-songwriter. He has written songs for Kelly Clarkson. I think you might have heard of it. My Life Would Suck Without You. I would try and sing it, but my voice is not attuned for that. I don't think Ian would ever have me as one of his clients, if you will. He's also written for Britney Spears Circus. He's written for Whitney Houston, Bruno Mars. I think we've heard of Bruno on a little song called Grenade. Pitbull, Fantasia, Lettucey, Martina McBride, the Backstreet Boys, Carrie Underwood, Jessie J, Miley Cyrus. I can go on and on and on. But with that, I just wanted to just welcome Claude Kelly to the Mike Muse Show. What's going on, Claude?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, man. That was a long list. I was getting dizzy myself.
Well, brother, you shouldn't be getting dizzy because you're the one who wrote it, man. So you have one. I want to say just thank you for giving us such great music, man, that we listen to and that we vibe to and that we party to, man. So how does it feel, just from a basic perspective, to have written for some of the biggest artists of our time and have written some of the biggest songs that we rock out to?
Great question. I wish I could say that I knew what I was doing as I was doing it. I guess the bitter pill of being a songwriter is that oftentimes while you're creating it in the studio, you have blinders on. You have no idea how the world will react. So when I was doing them, I wish I knew that some of those songs would be as long-lasting and as impactful as they were. But I really am proud of the fact that I was able to represent diversity in writing. That was always kind of my mission, even when I first started writing, was to prove that I was more than a writer of one genre, not just an R&B writer or a hip-hop writer or a pop writer, but I could keep you guessing because we're capable of all of it. So I'm most proud of the fact that when you kind of go through that list, you hear such a diverse, so many genres really of artists and styles and legends and new artists and everything in between. That's what I hope I represent as a songwriter and as an artist in general. So I'm very proud of that.
If you can just indulge us for a second, I know we're talking about the Music Modernization Act, and we're talking about the copyrights, and we're talking about country cowboy westerns and saloons, and we're talking about Sony ATV and Ian being in the south of France, man. But when you first heard your song, like, for example, My Life Would Suck Without You, we've heard that song on the radio for so many times. Like, how did you feel when you first heard it? Or I should say, where were you when you first heard it commercially? Like, were you driving your car? Were you at the mall? Were you at a party? Were you at a club? Like, where were you when you heard that?
I was actually at home.
It's not what I was looking for, Claude, man. That was such
the feeling of hearing your song on the radio, by the way, never gets old.
Really?
It never gets old. It's just, there's something about, as much as we debate about radio being relevant or on the way out or saving the day, there's just something magical about hearing your song, any song that you've been a part of, blasting over those airwaves. It gives it a different magic that's hard to describe. But for My Life Would Suck Without You, it was very, very early on. It came out in December of that year, so kind of it was like in that dead space where everyone was off and sitting at home almost for the holidays. So I heard it. I never had the radio on. That's why it was actually a big deal. I never had the radio on, and I'm never at home. And it just so happened that the radio happened to be on probably for holiday time, and I literally heard this song coming through that at first I had to remind myself I was on. I was like, it sounds familiar.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, that's your song.
Yeah.
And I definitely did a happy dance around the house and called a lot of people, and pretty cliche. I called my mom and the whole 9 yards because I couldn't believe it, but it was a milestone for sure.
Oh, man, you got us up here smiling in the studio, man, all warm and fuzzy. Claude Kelly with all the feels. Ian, I'm going to take it to you really quickly because you represent clients and songwriters like Claude, right, in those moments. Tell us what it's like for that writing process, right? Like in your role that you play in that. Like, do you pair the writer and the artist together in your role in that liaison? Not so much with Claude and Bruno, but just in general.
Absolutely. I mean, with not even just writers with the actual artists. Sometimes it's writers with other writers. Sometimes it's writers with other executives, other A&Rs at other different labels. We play a big connecting role in that. And for me, the way I view my role in terms of being a publisher, it's not just a matter of connecting the dots and helping the development. It's for me, I approach it from a standpoint of increasing their overall network. Mm-hmm. Even if that network is just knowledge in and of itself. So a lot of the times they look at us publishers on paper. It's, we're out there to get placements for these writers, for these artists, and also to help with getting their songs licensed to these big conglomerates. Mm-hmm. For me, because I'm not at a record label, because I don't necessarily control the purse strings at a record label, or can I make those exact decisions on what record gets placed and what doesn't get placed. I don't approach it from a standpoint of me trying to get your record in this on this album or in this TV show. Mm-hmm. Yes, those are always the goals, but for me, I look at this from a career building aspect in terms of it's a step-by-step process. We can't go out skipping steps. So for me, if I can increase your network and if I can increase your knowledge to one day be able to expand on your own and build on your business, then that's my job. Mm-hmm. Like, my job is done at that point.
What's interesting about this, I usually come from the political aspect and talk about the policy aspect, but we don't get a chance to have the layers pull back on music publishers, right? And how that is created and the role that publishers play in the music making process, because the record labels are so out front. So same question for you then, Ian. Like, how is it when you hear your songs that you've had an impact in creating this network and being the bridge between the producer and the writer, or the producer and the artist? Like, what's that feeling like for you when you hear your songs on the radio?
It's euphoric. I mean, I don't think it'll ever compare to what Claude described in terms of having his own pieces of work to be played. I think that's another level up. But for me, I look at it as you've built these little babies, and to see them happy, to see your goals start to come to fruition, makes it all not only worth it, but it gives you a sense of pride moving forward for the next client that you bring on, from the next songwriter that you bring on. And not only does it give you a sense of pride, but at least for me as a music publisher, it instills a sense of confidence that we are doing right. We are doing these things that, yes, on our end, we're building, we're increasing our market share. That's always the biggest goal for a publisher. But for me, I take it from more of a personal role, a personal standpoint with my songwriters. We go in this hand in hand. So their success is my success, and that's that's what I get. Like I said, you get those goosebumps, those hairs that stick up on your on your arms, like those are the feelings that I look for. Those are the things that make me do what I do.
Yeah. I mean, audience out there, if you're listening out there and if you are smiling too, tweet us at I am Mike Muse, MUSNSAME, or at Insight at SXM Insight, and let us know your thoughts and how you're vibing this conversation. And we look at something as trivial as music, and we don't think that they should be on Capitol Hill. And we look at something so trivial as music. Oh, this is something we just listen to when we're at the clubs, or that's just something I listen to when I'm at house cleaning up the house, or when I'm waiting for my kids' soccer practice to end. It's just this passing moment. But there's oftentimes that we really forget that is a business out there, right? And that most of these people, what I was going to talk to Claude with, don't have the opportunity to perform and go to Coachella, right? And go to Lollapalooza, right? In order to make money off of their performance, right? And so this is what happens when these writers that we really don't get a chance to ever hear about, we don't get a chance to talk to. Clearly, they don't want to talk to Claude right now neither, but this is the result of the act. And so as you guys are around Sony ATV, man, what is the feeling that you guys are getting right now, knowing that Congress is finally taking this serious, right? And is finally validating music, not just as this vanity perspective, but from an actual economics perspective?
I think that we're finally starting to move forward with like I said, the evolution of the legislation of music, one. And two, I think that songwriters are starting to more than ever realize the power that they have in their voice. I think this, up until the point that we've gotten to where we're at now with even just the idea of the Music Modernization Act. I think over the past 5 years, you've seen more songwriters, more prominent producers and artists be outspoken in terms of how they feel, what's fair, what's not fair, and what changes need to be had. And obviously we support that, but now you're starting to see things move. Mm-hmm. You're starting to see traction. You're starting to see, as they would say, tired with the road meets the rubber. Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, I think it's only the start. I think that we are on the cusp of a new golden era in music. Mm-hmm. And I think a big component is that even with the consumer, I think the consumer is starting to realize the value in not just an artist or a song, but the actual creation of a song and what goes into it. Mm-hmm. And it's special. It's special.
I like how you said the consumer is sort of understanding the value of it. I believe that when we look at politics and we look at our national discourse that we're having right now, there's always this notion of them versus those, right? There's a whole xenophobia, right? This whole othering aspect of it, and this have and the have-nots, and we're seeing the wealth divide increase, and we're seeing the educational gap increase too as well. And I think it's because most people really haven't taken consideration that the American government is their democracy too as well, and affects you on a day-to-day basis. And so I was curious, Ian, from a personal perspective, because now you are literally on the cusp of history, right? You being a music industry guy, you starting off as an intern at the record labels and working your way up right now to being a vice president of the number one publisher in the world. You now sit at this precipice where you can actually see history is about to take hold, and lives literally are about to be changed economically, which would then change cities. And so, but that front row seat, do you see politics differently now, in the sense of not partisanship, but more so policy? And then do you see the value of something you have an interest in? If you can just get enough folks around to really rally your local elected official or to rally your national political, that change really could happen. And we could see things on the docket like music, side by side with taxes and insurance and education. Has that viewpoint changed for you?
I don't know if my viewpoint has changed necessarily when it comes to politics and how our representatives are moving. But what has changed, and what I'm most proud of, and what I've stated to before, is you see more of a camaraderie, not just amongst the songwriters and trying to make the change, but amongst the music industry. I mean, I think it's widespread in terms of the outcry for what's needed and the fact that their needs change. I think we've done a great job of banding together and making sure we are at our representatives. We are at the DOJ's neck, excuse me, with fighting for these rights. I mean, and it's not just It's not just the Music Modernization Act. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of fights that are going on behind the scenes. It's an ongoing battle, and it's gonna continue to be a battle. But what I'm most proud of and what has changed in my sight is that when change needs to happen, we can come together and we can agree on at least a few issues, which, at times there's multiple varieties that oppose each other in the business of music. You have publishers against labels, and not necessarily against labels, but you have a bunch of components that have their own interests at hand. I don't want to say that anybody's necessarily against anybody. So, but everyone will have their own interest at heart. But there's a common denominator with where things need to head, and definitely a common denominator in this start. And I think things are only going to continue to evolve and change, and I think that there's a lot more change to come post this that could really tell the tale to whether we truly enter into a golden era, a new golden era that in music that I've stated. But I think another thing that I'm proud of, and I'll just touch on this, is I'm more proud of the consumer in terms of where they are now. For them, it's easy to take for granted the enjoyment of listening to music and what goes into that, and even to the credit of the DSPs, in acknowledging who is behind the songs, who is behind the collaborations to make this effort, this 3 to 4 minute song that you're listening to bring it to fruition. That has needed to be stated.
Yeah. Well, Ian, man, I couldn't think of a better way to end the show than those remarks right there. I just want to thank you so much for your advocacy. I want to thank you for bringing great music into our lives, into our households, into our barbecues, and on our road trips. Thank you for all the work that you do, man, in the music business and really shaping culture and changing narratives and now changing policy.
And thank you for doing this.
It's our pleasure here at Insight Man, the Mike Muse Show. Thank you so much, Claude Kelly. Thank you so much, Professor Lateef Mtima, for all the advocacy you guys do. And listeners, please tweet us. Tweet me at I am Mike Muse, MU. S and Sam E. Your thoughts. Tweet us at Insight SXM Insight. And Ian Holder, how can individuals reach you on Twitter?
I'm at Ian _Holder at Ian _Holder at Twitter, Instagram at Ian Holder.
Awesome, man. So feel free to hit Ian up too as well with questions. I'm sure there's some inspiring writers and producers out there that will be hitting you up, Ian. Ladies and gentlemen, until next time on the Mike Muse Show, I look forward to talking with you real soon.